going to hit record real quick. So this is the first of our mindset trainings. Again, this is part of what we're going to be offering at BFP from now on, at least twice a year, a 6-week mindset training course focused in 6 different areas of strengthening your mindset to really help you. You're going to hear me say this a lot, identify with the person or with the status or with the situation that you want to be in. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into that today before we get into goal setting. So 6 different areas. Goal setting is the first one. We're gonna use a newer technique. We're gonna get away from SMART goals and give you something a little bit newer, although it's kind of similar. But this is where it starts, and I got some good analogies and some things to tell you why this is where it needs to start. So some of this stuff might sound familiar, some of it might not. But what I ask is that everybody comes to this open and ready to learn, and hopefully ready to gain some new perspective, because you're going to hear me talk a whole lot about that as well. So let's get right into it. So let me make sure we got everybody muted. There we go. All right, cool. So for change to happen, right, there has to be a will for us to change. So for a lot of us, there we go. Sorry, I have to go through and mute everybody. I start hearing noises. Apologize. So for most of us, most of the time, we're all pretty comfortable with the affairs in our life. Like, even if we're going through a tough time, like generally there's this level of comfort that we can find in things that we're used to. And that tends to help with excuses, right? Like, it tends to help us want to stay settled in that area. So like, I'm too busy to go to the gym. Like I feel like I need to lose weight, but nobody else in my family really bothers with it. So why should I? Then there's other excuses, right? Like, it could be day-to-day things. Like, maybe you already work out because all of you are members of the gym. So it could be different things. But the point is that we excuse ourselves and we reason ourselves out of taking action oftentimes, especially as it relates to goals. And whether it's like the steps towards a goal, or it's a big, like, hairy, audacious goal, we're pretty good at reasoning ourselves out of taking action. And I say this to myself as well, because I've created massive plans for just the greatest goals that I've ever had before. And then when it came time to take action, I've backed off because maybe things were okay. And it didn't warrant me to continue to step out of my comfort zone into that goal. So these are generally the standards that like we set for ourselves, and the standards that give us the life that we have. And you have to realize that our brain remembers every time that you start something and then give up and talk yourself out of starting it, right? Our brain remembers that. It also remembers every time you try something and fail. Quickly, everybody should have seen a link in the Facebook event for this manual right here. So a lot of what I'm going to reference in this presentation today is going to come, a lot of it's in this manual, but there's actually more detail in this manual. You can all print this out. If you print it out today, that's great. You don't have to have this today, but it's something that we're going to work through together over the next week as we work on setting goals with some of the stuff you learn here today. And there's a little bit more detail in here. So back to focusing on like what we need to actually start to change, right? Like, before we can even set a goal, right? We talked about our brain remembers. Like, every time we give up, we talk ourselves out of getting up, going for a run, going for a walk, because we'd rather watch something on Netflix. Brain remembers that. It notes that repeating pattern, and it tries to make things really easy for us. So that's what turns into a habit with our brain. It creates a loop. So we don't even have to remember it, right? We can forget all about it, but it might happen naturally. So that's why whenever you feel uncomfortable about some aspect of your life and you try to make a change, you feel physical pain. We manifest pain, or we manifest anxiety. That's your brain seeing you step out of your usual pattern, out of your habit, and then resisting you to do that because it doesn't want you to get disappointed. It's just trying to protect you. So it guides you to retreat in order to return to that place of comfort, that place where you don't make changes that you were driven towards. We want to help you with this, right? Tune in with me. Override your brain. Because your brain doesn't know the difference between good and bad. The pain of staying the same, in order for us to change, this is what it says on the screen, right? The pain of staying the same needs to outweigh the pain of change. I'm gonna say that one more time because I think it sounds kind of funky. The pain of staying the same needs to outweigh or be worse than the pain of change. So the first step towards lasting success is to get disturbed. You're gonna have to force yourself to be uncomfortable. I talk about this all the time when I'm coaching in our workouts. Like, you got to get outside of your head, because that head's trying to drive you to a state of comfort. I'm trying to pull you out of that state when you're working out, but you have to hold yourself accountable to do this outside of the gym if you're looking for change and you're looking for a stronger mindset. So we want to reach a place where, like, you say to yourself, no more, it's time for a change, and it actually has an effect. People, I know that sounds nice, right? Like, it makes sense. But people aren't going to, you're not just going to change. I'm not just going to change from reading this. You're not just going to change from me saying this. People don't change. They only change when their perspective changes, right? Like the difference between these clear seeing glasses and the fuzziness that you see all around them. And people really don't like being told what to do. And, me especially. So I own a business. But when people change, it's because they see things with a fresh pair of eyes. And that's my main goal of this whole 6 weeks, is to help you see some things with a fresh pair of eyes. Goal setting included, because if anybody's driven goal setting into the ground, it's me. So I've got to approach this myself, teaching this with a fresh pair of eyes. So I'm curious, though. I want y'all to write in the chat. Anybody who's available to write in the chat. And this would be really cool if several of you wrote in the chat. But when do you think most people have a change in perspective? Like, you can use one word, you can use a sentence, but type it into the chat. Give me somebody, type it into the chat. Like, when do you normally think people's perspective changes? Like, what leads to you having a change of perspective? You could say, like, personally. Yeah, so we've got a health scare. That's a really good one. And that pretty much is kind of where I'm headed here. We got another one is like a life event, right? It could be somebody passes away. It could be, like you move. It could be you have to move across the country. Could be having a kid. Could be going to the doctor and they tell you something you didn't want to hear. Yeah, those are good. So that's really where I was headed, is disaster. Something really bad happens. All of a sudden, we see people behave in a way they wouldn't normally behave. This picture, it should be accurate. It's from Google, but this is from Rocky Point after Hurricane Florence. Remember what people did here, right? Like, they lost their entire house, and so did most people in this area of our county. And people were getting in boats to get there, to help them get out of their houses, to help them rip out the floors in their houses, to help bring them food, right? To help raise money so they can pay for repairs, like things that just don't happen every day. And the people that this happens to have a whole new perspective and a whole new appreciation for their home, the flooring, stuff on the walls, like, and how quickly that can be taken away from you by something that's completely out of your control. That's something like that leads to a perspective change, right? Now, I want you to have a perspective change without having a disaster or a life event happen. Again, our goal at BFP is to provide you with the ability to strengthen your mindset, balance your nutrition, improve your fitness, and gain a supportive community while you're doing it. So our 6-week Mindset Academy is the beginning of you getting a brand new pair of eyes. We won't have a disaster to help you change this perspective, which is a good thing, but we'll learn how uncomfortable you must get to make change. And sometimes that has to be forced. Like, you have to actually force, you have to say it, like, I want to be here, but here's the action I need to take to get there. Man, that makes me uncomfortable. Man, that's a pain in the butt. Man, that's stressful. Man, that takes a lot of extra time. All kinds of different things. But you're going to have to force it. You've got to get uncomfortable in order for any change to happen, whether it's a change related to a goal that you set or whether it's a change related to your actual mindset about life. And the changes that I'm talking about aren't just, like I said, related to goals. They're related to all aspects of your health and fitness, your general overall wellness, and your mindset. So as we go through these 6 areas over the next 6 weeks, and the ones I'm going to review here in just a minute, you can expect change. You have to start to identify, you're going to hear that word a lot, the word identify, with what you're looking to achieve. And this isn't some weird frou-frou, like manifesting, nature, universe thing. This is a real thing that we're going to talk about with identifying with what you want to achieve. And we're having more on that in a minute, but it's important to note that it won't be easy if you're truly going to take this on. All right. So everybody with me, even though everybody's got their camera off, because I guess you don't want to be seen. Oh, I got a few of you. I got Jennifer and Christine. So I need you to, you can sit up straight, but go ahead and just cross your arms. Let me see if I can tilt my camera here. Cross your arms like you normally would. Okay. So just cross them however you would normally cross them. Now I want you to take and switch your hands. It's kind of confusing, actually. So it doesn't feel right, right? Like maybe it was weird to do it. But the point is that something out of the norm is uncomfortable. It doesn't feel right, right? Like I don't want to sit here and talk to you like this if I'm going to cross my arms. If I'm going to cross my arms, I'm going to go back to the way that I was. Now, take your fingers, interlock your fingers like you normally would, thumbs on top, and switch your thumbs. That's all I want you to do. Just switch your thumbs to where they naturally went. It's uncomfortable, right? It feels weird. Like I feel super awkward and I feel like my hands look weird and this isn't the right way that I'm supposed to be. I want to go right back to here. But if I continue doing this over and over again, switching my thumbs, it would eventually, either way, and especially if I just stayed here, would be comfortable. Whereas it was uncomfortable, right? And potentially if you practice certain things enough, right? Especially when it comes to inside our head, the old way of doing things can actually be what becomes uncomfortable. And your new way becomes more comfortable, in which case we then have to find other ways to make change if they're so desired. But that's the point. I'm here to help you, and I'm here to help you embrace being uncomfortable so that when it becomes comfortable, I'm here to help you embrace being uncomfortable so that it becomes more comfortable. I'm here to be your coach, right? We use that term, I guess, kind of loosely in my industry. But the word coach originally comes from a horse-drawn coach or a carriage. It's there, it picks you up from where you are, wherever you are in the minute, and it's in that time, and then it's going to help you get to where you want to go. That's what I'm here to help you do over these next 6 weeks. But you're going to have to do a little bit of that work too. So again, I mentioned this manual earlier. We're going to want you to work your way through this workbook. This is just for week 1. And it's not a million pages. It's not a ton of stuff to write. But it's fairly like in depth. There's several questions there, but there's reading to go through that we're going to touch on today. So please print this and take this seriously. If you really want to do this, if you really want to work on your mindset, okay? So the 6 things we're going to go through include goal setting, habits, willpower, motivation, self-belief, and achievement. Sounds like a self-help book kind of, doesn't it? My job as your mindset coach is to present these in a way, again, that you haven't considered it before. We got that new set of eyes. Hopefully even me just saying that to you gets you just to open your mind up a little bit. We have to have that new perspective that can potentially lead to change. And today we start with goal setting. So imagine a game of soccer. And then I want you to, let's say you come in, the crowd's going nuts. All the players are on the field. They're going hard. And you're watching, right? Everything seems cool. Everything's going well. You're excited. While everybody might be running around on the field and moving the ball, like you start to realize like it gets kind of boring. And you realize there's no goals. The soccer goals are gone. It's just people kicking a ball without a purpose. After a while, they realize there's no point. Everybody gives up and goes home. So I want to ask you, are you playing the game of life without the goals that make it worthwhile? And it's not just a story or an analogy that like works with what I'm trying to teach you. We are, as human beings, we are driven by things that we work towards. Everybody, no matter how unmotivated somebody might seem, or how undriven for me, like my 14-year-old teenager might be, all of us as humans need something to work towards. The problem is most of us walk around without having goals on the field. That's what the masses are doing. It's what they do every day. And I don't think you want to be like the masses, because if you did, you wouldn't be on this call. You don't want to be in the minority. Those who know what they want, ideally you would want to be in the minority, right? Because those are the people that know what they want, and they're actually they're actively taking steps to move towards it. So it's interesting because we often forget about our big goals. We lose sight of them Again, because our brain wants to pull us back to that state of comfort. And we can also get shiny object syndrome. My gosh, this happens to me so much in business. You would have no idea. Like, I could be hyper focused on a project, working on getting things done, making things better for my staff, helping my managers, doing all this. And then I'm like, oh, what's that? And then I want to start working on that. And then it pulls away from the thing that I was trying to work on. There's an interesting study that was done where they put people into fMRI machines. And what they did in this study was they sort of wired their brains up, and they asked them 3 questions. So they asked them to think of themselves first. The first question they asked is to think of themselves. So let me reframe that because I feel like I've ran over it. The first question that was asked, they asked them to think of themselves. So like, picture yourself. And then on the machine, you would see a part of the brain light up. The second question they asked them to think was to think of a stranger. Just think of somebody, maybe somebody out on the street, doesn't matter what they look like, who they are, but you don't know them, right? They're a stranger. So you'd see a different part of the brain light up than when they thought of themselves. Then the third question, they asked them to think of themselves in the future and to guess what part of the brain, they asked them to think of themselves in the future. All right, so think of yourself, one part of the brain lights up. Think of a stranger, another part of your brain lights up. Now go back to thinking of yourself, but in the future. And it's interesting because do you know what part what part of the brain do you think lit up for over 80% of the participants in this study? It was actually the same part of the brain that lit up when they thought about a stranger. So they were thinking about themselves in the future, but it was affecting them in the same way as them thinking about a complete stranger. So what does that mean? Most people don't identify with where they're going because they don't know. There's always this dynamic tension. We even talk about this in sales. There's always this dynamic tension pulling you between where you are and where you want to go. And it's our job as coaches, whether we're just meeting you, somebody to come into our gym to decide if them wanting to lose weight is going to have enough tension between where they are now and then where they're trying to get, and if this membership they're coming into with us is worth it. But it also it can relay into anything else in life as well. And once you know, once you understand that tension is there and where you need to, once you understand that tension, then you can begin to identify, like really feel it and understand it inside and here where you want to go. I want you to identify with the outcome of your goals. Okay, so what does the word identity mean? And this was a big light bulb for me while I was studying this. In its origin, identity means repeated beingness. So like being over and over and over and over again. It means that in our everyday lives, most people repeat over and over again who they think they really are. Even people who live in pain. So folks who live in pain and frustration from their pants no longer fitting, or back pain, or possibly not feeling confident around their spouse, or when they want to go to a party, right, and they're not confident. They live with this pain. And sometimes that pain will help drive change, but ultimately that brain takes back over and it takes them to that state of comfort that I talked about. It's that state of comfort is where most people identify. I'm asking you right now to stop that. You need to identify with where you want to go. And I'm not trying to be like a Tony Robbins or anything like that, but you have to really consider this. Like, if you can't really imagine, if you have these goals and you can't even imagine yourself achieving those goals, right? It's not going to happen. There's not going to be any self-belief. If you don't believe in yourself, then why would you take steps to go somewhere that you don't think you can go? You have to start to identify, right? We've got to, like the picture here, right? Like, you got to stop being Clark Kent and be Superman all the time. That's where we need to identify. So this is that new pair of eyes is your identity, is your repeated beingness is what you want to be, not what you have been. So do you identify with what you think you are or what you want to become? From right now moving forward, you will identify with what you hope to be. And most people, I'm just going to say this because it's breakaway, but most people, that's being healthy, happy, strong, fit, confident. So That's your new perspective. Identifying with where you want to go, not with where you are right now. That's going to help you stop that brain from taking you back to that state of comfort, because when it tries to take you back, it's going to take you back to where you want to go, because that's where you're going to identify. So let's talk about my goals for a minute. This is what's on the background of my computer, my laptop. My goals are to grow BFP to some specific numbers with our large group training, semi-private training, youth training, all the services that we offer, right? I've got goals for our general managers. And then I've got more personal goals, and you can see them on here. Like, I want to get the DECA trifecta. I'd like to take 4 family trips this year, hopefully a couple of alone trips with my wife. I want to go back to my 2-time Spartan trifecta. And there's some other things too. My main focus is seeing where I can have an impact, how I can do it on my family, with my staff, and then the greater community around me. And I believe we've always had an impact on people at BFP, and every now and then I get the opportunity to hear people tell me about that. But this year, our goal is to be more purposeful at BFP about that. And for me, it's the same with my family as well as with my staff, and to see if we can increase that impact. Now, I've had some failures before I even had these goals set. These aren't just like general goals. It's very recent, most of these for me. Last year was a different story. So for me, opening BFP in 2013, long-term vision was always to have another location. That happened in 2021. So it was figuring that out, having my mentors teach me, and learning how to work through that, right? But that, I no longer had vision. I no longer had anything to identify with. And it took me several months to realize that for me, that was like prison. And it wasn't where I wanted to go. When I don't have something to identify with and I don't have something to work towards, it's just like a constant state of stagnancy, right? And that's not good for anybody and anything in any state. So this year, at the end of the year, I finally forced myself. I took about 3 months to focus on the vision. I started with, and like we're going to ask you guys to do in your workbook, is to start with your personal why. For me, it's absolutely everything I do is for God, my wife and kids, and then my desire to make an impact on the people around me. And I could go much deeper into it, but I'm going to say this to y'all later. Once you identify your why in this workbook, it should be something that can potentially make you cry. Because if it's not, more than likely, it's not going to drive you to take action when you don't feel like it. We're going to talk about that a little bit more too. We're also going to talk about opponents and obstacles. My biggest obstacle is myself. For me, like, things are never happening fast enough. Ever. It's probably why I'm talking this fast right now. There's an issue with speed in my life, and I want more of it, but I have to learn to be content and be patient. And that's one of my biggest obstacles. That's kind of a big sort of large view of it, but there's other things you have to consider too. Like, we have 3 kids. I just had to, 15 minutes before I started this presentation, I had to run my kid up the street to his youth group. All these little obstacles that can just jump in the way. We're going to talk about getting ahead of those and using those to fuel you, understanding that obstacles are the path. They're not just in your way. In 3 years, my hope, this is more future, folks, my hope is also for Melody and I to save enough money to have a down payment to put on an Airbnb. So this is like a big goal, something that really just came into my head over the last 6 months. It's going to take a really aggressive savings plan, and there's a lot of sacrifices we're going to have to make, but we decided this together, and it's not like I'm looking at that and just because it's a big goal, I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm that seems unachievable, right? We're beginning as a couple to identify with our goals. And again, that's what I'm asking you to do here. So when it comes to goals, this is all in the manual, personal, present, positive. It's very important that they're written in a specific way, which we call the 3 Ps. So goals, they need to be personal. We want to use I. We're not going to use it. We're not going to use they. It has to be you. They need to be present tense. So I am, not I will. And I've probably taught I will before. It needs to be I am, present tense, not I will, and not I hope to or I want to. It's I am going to do this, or I am this, right? This outcome. We have to identify as that. And it has to be positive. So this is crucial. I am slimmer is positive. I have lost weight is not, as it talks about what you're losing and not what you're gaining. So it needs to be personal. It needs to be present tense. And then it needs to be positive when we're actually writing this goal out. And again, you're going to go a little more in depth in your manual. You're going to write out some goals, and then you'll do that. It's like day 1, day 2, day 3. So the manual guides you through this daily. But the first day, you're just going to write out a bunch of goals. And then the next day, you'll go into the 3 Ps, and you'll be able to just pick a few of those that are the most important. You'll have to prioritize. But you can test them with somebody else who's on this call right now. You can test them. You can email me. You can talk to me, but we can talk about it. We can see, are they truly personal, present, and positive, right? And in the manual, I want to say it. So we talk about getting disturbed. We talk about goal setting, writing a bunch of goals down. And then we talk about being personal, present, and well, I guess that doesn't show very well positive, but then there's space on the next page to start to write that stuff down and to write down your why. So the science of goal setting. We're going to get away for this course. We're going to get away from SMART goals. We're going to get away from smarter goals. And not because it's wrong or it doesn't work. I just think it's kind of been beat to death. And by me, it's been beaten to death by me, because this is the only thing I was ever taught and about the only thing I've ever been able to find to study. But since studying this mindset training from this gentleman named Pete Cohen, he brings up another way to view things. And after you've written this is like the steps to goal setting. So another way to approach when you're actually writing out your official goal, not just writing out all the goals that you have. So for these wildly important goals, remember, we want you to consider why they're important. Think about what it will be like for you to achieve them, because we have to identify what will it mean for you? What will it mean for your family? What will it mean for your life? Just as importantly, what will life be like if you don't achieve your goals? We have to go to the other side of the coin too, because for some people that can drive them even more. Where will you be in 2, 5, 10 years time if things carry on as they are now? Right? These are questions that we ask people a lot with coaching. This is what we mean by getting disturbed. I talked about getting disturbed earlier in the call, right? Getting uncomfortable and focusing on that, or allowing that to happen, and not being heavily focused on maintaining that comfort. So your why, remember we talked about getting disturbed, right? Your why, I mentioned this earlier, it needs to make you cry, because if it doesn't, it's not going to drive you when you don't feel like taking action, okay? When you don't feel like identifying with that uncomfortableness. So the first letter in the acronym WHOOP is wish. So this is kind of like your wildly important goal, right? After we've written a whole bunch of them down, we prioritize the one main thing we want to work on. We want to repeat that wildly important goal that you're aiming for, and we make sure we write it using those 3 Ps, right? Personal, present, and positive. The second O is outcome. Okay, and if I should have written this a little bit differently, because the third O would actually be bigger than the second one. But the outcome is going to be part of it's going to be part of personal, present, and positive. But this is where you got to get specific. They always talk about this would be the S in SMART goals. But you got to get specific about that wish. So what does that look and feel like? How will you tell when you've achieved it? Right? We got to have some kind of number. We have to have some kind of outcome to measure. So for example, if your wish is to be slimmer, fitter, and healthier, decide how many pounds you'll be lighter by, and then by when. What level of fitness you want, perhaps like in terms of you want to run a 5K in this time. You want to improve on your DECA strong event by this much. You want to increase your back squat by this much. Of course, it needs to be realistic, but we want to talk about like what level of fitness you want. Like this depends on if your goals are specific to fitness. And then how you want to look and feel and so on. So you know the results you're seeking, you know why you want them, and then we're going to move on to this next step. So we've talked about your wish, right? That's the goal. That's what you want to achieve. And then we get more specific and time bound with it with our outcome. And the next part we got to talk about is that other O, which is the obstacle. So this would be the big O, because this is one that SMART goals don't really take into account. We've kind of covered SMART with the wish and the outcome. But the second O is obstacles. And this is where it's inspired by a new mission. You have to be determined to master this, right? Like, so if we don't anticipate obstacles that'll get in the way, then when we meet opposition, we usually give up. Our brain takes us back to being comfortable, right? We're no longer identifying with where we want to go. So now is the time to understand where your opponents may lie, the ones that bring you opposition. And there's 3 different levels of opposition, or 3 different types to consider. So external, these are the things like that go on in the wider world that kind of have to happen. Like, we have to pay bills, we've got social obligations, and then like the physical environment, like working out in the gym, not working out in the gym, all those other distractions in our lives. These are all examples of external factors. We don't really have as much control over these. Intimate opponents. So this is about like the people closest to us. So as an example, this is not my wife, but my wife doesn't support my dream of sailing around the world. My mom needs daily care. Okay, I've been through that where you care for a family member. It's a big opponent to specific goals. So how are your obligations to your nearest and dearest, plus their wants and needs, likely to distract you from your goals? So these are things we have to consider, these external opponents, intimate opponents, and then internal, all the things inside you that put up barriers to you taking action, which is your brain, right? Negative self-talk. I'll never stick at it. What will other people think? I'm easily distracted by other things. Like, what will other people think? I would assume that most of you on here at some point lately have seen the Facebook ads for Breakaway Fitness. Now, most of you probably saw my wife, and she's beautiful and articulate and sounds great, and her ads do great. But the men's ads are me, and some of the women's ads are too. But we do all these crazy things in these ads because we have guidance from a marketing company. And immediately it's like, what will people think? But if all I worry about is what people will think, I'm never going to be able to effectively market for my business. Because nobody's going to be the biggest cheerleader for my business. It has to be me. So we've got to get this negative self-talk out of our head, or you'll never be able to grow. You'll never be able to identify with what you want to be. Take a look in the mirror and think about what your biggest opponent is when it comes to that self-talk, and when it comes into like the formula for lasting change. So there's a sheet that looks like this, what you got on the screen in your workbook, and it helps you identify your obstacles. It's right there, but it looks just like that. And this part can get pretty uncomfortable because you got to be really brutally honest with yourself if you're going to work on strengthening your mindset and identifying where you want to go and approaching this with new eyes. It's super easy to get discouraged at this point in your workbook and all these things, because you're just identifying stuff that's in your way. It's like complaining on a sheet of paper. But I'm asking you to become aware. I'm asking you to get uncomfortable, because as uncomfortable as you can possibly get, because if you're aware, then you can start to take action. You can look at those opponents like square in the face and just say, bring it on, because you'll be ready for them when they actually come about. There's an old Chinese proverb, and then there's actually somebody they quote with this quote as well. But it says, if you find a path with no obstacles, it probably doesn't lead anywhere. It's not the obstacle is in the way. It is the way. You need obstacles to help you, here's the word again, identify with where you want to be. I'm going to repeat it because it's important. It's not the obstacle is in your way. It's not external opponents that you almost have no control over that's in the way. It's not intimate opponents that if they're potentially like other people, you really don't have any control over that either. That's not in your way. It is the way. It's just part of your life. And the sooner we can accept this, the sooner we can identify with where we want to be. I talked about this early. Well, as human beings, we're driven primarily on how we feel. If we don't feel like doing something, often we're not going to do it. I mean, that's kind of common sense, right? But again, it's our brain pulling us back to comfort. When if you want to go somewhere that you're not, you want to achieve something you haven't, you can't be comfortable. Too often we identify with how we're feeling, though. We let feelings dictate our actions, and then our actions dictate our identity. Again, you're not going to be able to identify with where you're going if you allow your minute-to-minute feelings to dictate the actions that you take, or the lack of action that you take. which is probably a little bit more accurate. Got to switch this around. Recognize the obstacles. They are the journey, right? Things are going to suck, but that doesn't make it abnormal. It doesn't mean you're worse at something than somebody else. It doesn't mean you need to compare yourself to somebody else. It's part of the journey. The obstacles are the journey. And we can identify with where we want to be and act accordingly, which leads us to having more feelings that we want to have. So once we recognize obstacles are the journey, then we can identify with where we want to be. We can take action that leads to where we want to be. And that leads to us feeling the way that we want to feel. So instead of feelings dictating actions leading to our identity, we focus on the obstacles being a part of the journey, which allows us to identify, instead of that, our identity, to lead to the actions that we need to take, which leads to us feeling the way that we want to feel. Okay, so we've just switched those three things around. This was something I feel like I was lucky enough to learn how to deal with earlier on. I don't say earlier on, 37 now, like late 20s. It was before I opened BFP, and I had a job that was a great job, but I felt like I didn't want to be there anymore. I was ready for that next best thing, right? Like maybe I was starting to identify with where I wanted to go, but I was not allowing myself to be content. And at that time, that affected my job performance. I didn't lose my job or anything, but it made me feel even worse because I allowed those feelings of discontentment to affect my actions. And then for the way that I felt was not great. It was like this loop of me feeling bad action, feeling bad action. And that was my identity. I had to actively start to talk to myself in a different way. I had to pray more, and I had to focus on the things that I was looking to achieve, to take action outside of that current job to get those things to happen, which at the time was BFP. But I also had to carry myself as a professional in my current job as well and make sure I served the people there that deserve to be served. So this was a tough lesson I had to go through. But if you haven't been through something like that, it's important. We don't want feelings to dictate our actions, because that's going to lead to the identity that is not the one we want down the road. 83% of people never set goals. That's a lot. 14% of people set them, but they don't write them down. 3% of people actually write their goals down. They set them and they write them down. And the ones that write them down are significantly more likely to achieve them. So you know what you want, what it looks and feels like as you go through this manual, as you use this WHOOP terminology. And you know we're going to use that to identify what might get in the way. So now it's time to make a plan. This is the P in WHOOP. So what are you actually going to do to take you forward? So we can plan for our obstacles so that we know they're part of the way, but we need to plan that first step going down that path with those obstacles. And we need to plan the next step after that. This could be daily steps, weekly steps. This is how we develop new habits. And this is where you need to focus a lot of your energy and effort and thoughts, because we can have this outcome out here and we can identify with that. But if we don't take those action steps, that's never going to happen. So we have to identify with where we want to be, and then we have to focus on those action steps, because we really can't control that outcome. All we can control is those action steps. But if we don't believe we can do it, none of it matters. So again, identifying with where you want to go. But the plan is, what are you actually going to do to take you forward? So it's particularly important to plan for when those opponents or those oppositions are going to be in your life, and they step in and try to block that trajectory. And some of those opponents can be avoided by like early action, right? You can pre-prepare, like you can lay your clothes out the night before you're supposed to go work out early in the morning, so that when you hit whatever obstacle it might be in the middle of the night, like a kid waking up like us, at least you've got your clothes laid out so that you're ready to go when you do wake up. You can also address some of those when they come up, while others, you'll just have to experience, and we'll have to figure out how to deal with it afterwards. Only you are going to know what works best in each case, but we've got to have a plan for those steps. And again, we've got the workbook here to help you go through that plan. And you can always run it by a coach, me preferably, because I'm the main one teaching this stuff right now. So now it's time to just start to consider, what are your goals? And if you can right now, you can go ahead and start scribbling stuff down. But I would love for you to print out this workbook to do it through there, because it's a systematic approach. to helping you identify with where you want to go. And some of the questions you're going to be answering, like what needs to change in your life to reach your goal? What will change your limiting beliefs and promote the beliefs that you need, right? What standards do you need to set for yourself to achieve your goals? What do you need to tackle those opponents? What action, what action can you take to reach your goals? What are you committed to doing right now? That first step of that plan. Is there a new routine you need to establish? How often are you going to review and update this plan? These are all questions for you to go through in that manual. This section of it is actually kind of towards the later part of the manual, because just like we do with this workshop today, like we want to educate you in that manual before you start to really put in the work. Blind people can see, and they just don't see in the way we do. There's 100% blind sports teams who can do things like play baseball or cricket. They can't see the ball hit the bat like we do, but they can visualize it based off of sounds and things they feel, and they can visualize it happening. Brain doesn't know the difference, but that's seeing. It's just a different perspective. It's time for you to identify with where you want to go and to do it with a new pair of eyes. So do you think it will be hard? It's actually good. That means when it gets hard, that you'll be prepared. There's a pretty interesting study on that where they talk about, if I can phrase this the right way, they basically asked people to think about their goals, and they wanted to envision them. Basically, if you think your goal is going to be tough, if it's going to be tough to achieve it, you set a hard goal, you're much more likely to achieve that goal because you're going to expect the opposition when it arises and be prepared for it mentally. If you assume a goal is going to be easy, you're less likely to, it's going to be easy to achieve. You're less likely to achieve it because when those obstacles come up, it's going to be more unexpected. It's going to be harder than you thought it was going to be. And again, what does your brain do? It takes you back to being comfortable. And that's what's going to happen. So again, a different perspective. It's time for you to identify with where you want to go, to do it with a new pair of eyes. That is the end of my presentation. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to unmute and ask. I do have time right now because I've only got one kid here and he's over there kicking it. You can also ask in the chat if you want to do that. Otherwise, if you're ready to hop off, you're welcome to hop off. But I know we got a good amount. I'm happy with the group we got on here. Yeah, Liam, we'll see you later, man. Appreciate you hopping on. So you guys should have access to this manual. I put it in the Facebook event. What I'm going to do, well, you can see it right here. I guess I should have been showing you that instead of just holding up pieces of paper, right? But this is it, right? It goes through everything I just went through. Take your time. This will be the first step, day one today, probably tomorrow. Just to think about where you're at, no judgment. And then you start going through a lot of the things that I just talked about. Let's see, what do we got? Got it, Liam. No worries, dude. All right, so I guess if nobody has any questions, I'm going to shut it down. I did record, so we'll have this. You can always refer back to it. Feel free. My email is coachjoe@bfpnc.com. So if you have any specific questions for me, feel free to email me. We can also, I'd love to get the conversation going in the Facebook group if you have questions as well, so that we can continue to grow this mindset focus at BFP, because it really is a missing piece to help you outside of the gym. And that's what we want to do. So hope everybody has a great day tomorrow, has a great night tonight. And I will see everybody around soon.